I want to welcome you to Canyon Creek Church. I want to specifically say hi to our Everett campus, our Palouse campus, and all of you that participate in our online campus. I want you to grab your Bibles and I want you to turn to the book of Acts, chapter 16. Di and I are deep in the middle of planning our trip to Israel. We have about 30 people from our church that are joining us in February, and every time we go to Israel, I remember back on all these other trips to Israel, and every time I go, it is life-changing and impacting, and I really want to encourage you to consider participating in an Israel trip in the years to come. We do them every other year, and there is nothing that will make the Bible come alive and your faith come alive more than joining us in the Holy Land. But in 2014, we were leading another trip to Israel, and since Di and I are already over on that side of the world, we try to add on like a 3 or 4 day vacation before afterwards. And in 2014, we went to Greece, and we stayed in the city of Athens, which has lots of biblical significance, a ton of historical significance. It's really interesting. And one day while we were in Greece, we rented a car, and a driver drove us around. Basically, everything in Greece is dirt cheap, so you can afford to do this pretty inexpensively. But he drove us around to all the sites around Greece. And I'll never forget when we went to Delphi. And you're about to see a picture of an excavation from Delphi. And why Delphi became famous 3,000 years ago is because people would visit from all around the Middle East, and they would come to visit the Oracle of Delphi. And the Oracle of Delphi was this young woman who was believed to be able to tell the future. And so people would travel from all over because they would want to know, leaders would want to know, should we go to war? And people would want to know, is this going to be a good harvest time? Should we plant crops? What should we do? You know, should I marry this person? Should I go into a partnership with this person? And they would visit this oracle hoping for a hint to their future. So they would arrive at this shrine and they would see a young woman who was oftentimes wrapped in a python. She was also called the Pythia. And she would stand over a crack in a rock. And she would, in the moment, go into a trance, swaying back and forth. They believed that she was inhabited by or influenced by the spirit of Apollo. And then the Oracle of Delphi would make all of these cryptic, kind of confusing statements. And the people would then take that information and they would try to interpret it and try and find a hint to what they should do for their future. One of the things that I find totally fascinating is 3,000 years ago, people wanted a hint about their future. And today, we are exactly the same way. I mean, people just want to know, should I invest in this stock? Should I bet in that? Should I take this job? Should I marry this person? One of the reasons that people even now, still love the movie Back to the Future is because they get to go back in time so that it can affect their future. And most of us, we think, if I could get a hold of that sports almanac, what could that do? Because everybody wants a hint about their future. One of the things that was interesting about the Oracle of Delphi is that years later, when archaeologists excavated that region, they sent in some geologists once they found the shrine to study it, and they actually discovered that there was seismic activity underneath this rock that had a crack in the middle of it. And these noxious fumes that people would smell was actually a mixture of methane gas and carbon dioxide. And that is actually what caused her to basically, in essence, get high and start rambling on and on and on. But I find it interesting that even today we still want to hint about our future. And I don't think there's any other topic that is more applicable when we talk about the Holy Spirit than talking about what it means to be led by the Spirit. Because we all want a hint of what we should do and where we should go, and we want to be led by the Spirit to do the right thing. And we hear teaching all the time that says things like, you don't want to just do what's good. You want to find the best. And we hear stories that the enemy of the best is the good and things like that. And we want to know, Lord, where do we go? Which direction do we head? So I want to talk to you today a little bit about being led by the Spirit. And I think the greatest example of that, we find it in Acts chapter 16. So this is a story about the Apostle Paul. And at this point, he was traveling with a group of people, but his partner was a guy by the name of Silas. And Silas was, like Paul, was a Jew who was also now a follower of Jesus. But the church in Jerusalem asked Silas to travel alongside Paul on some of his missionary journeys. So he was basically like his apprentice, his associate. And where we find Paul in Acts chapter 16 is Paul is ministering in Galatia, which the easiest way to explain it is Galatia is modern day Turkey. And the way that they would travel back then, because it was the quickest, easiest way to travel a large group of people and all of their belongings, was they would travel by boat. So Paul is in Galatia. He's trying to figure out where he should go next. And we read this in verse 9. It says, "A vision appeared to Paul in the night. And a man in Macedonia was standing there, urging him, saying, 'Paul, come over to Macedonia and help us.' And when Paul had seen the vision, he immediately we sought to go on into Macedonia, concluding that God had called us to preach the gospel to them." So Paul is saying, "Lord, where do I go? What's the future hold for me? Where should I head?" And he has a vision. And the Lord says, "Paul, go to Macedonia. I want you to go there." First off, how many of you want life to be that easy? I mean, we want to say, "Lord, I need to know where to go." And next thing you know, you get a vision. So Paul gets a vision to go to Macedonia. So they load up in the boat and they start heading down to Macedonia, which would be modern day Greece. And as they're on this journey, they end up docking in Philippi. And Philippi was one of the largest, most influential cities in Greece at the time, or Macedonia at the time. And once Paul was in Philippi, he had heard that a group of Jewish people had set up a place to pray outside of the city, kind of over by a river. And it was the Sabbath, and a good Jewish person would go to church, go to the synagogue, go pray on the Sabbath. So Paul and the people with him went over to this place of prayer that they heard that the Jewish people had set up. And while they were there, they met a woman by the name of Lydia. And Lydia was a very devout Jew. And we don't know exactly how, but we know that her and Paul begin to talk about Jesus. And that at some point in this discussion, Lydia and her entire family makes a faith commitment to Jesus. And Paul baptizes her and her entire family. And then finally, Lydia says, "Hey, you guys don't have a place to stay. You have a large group of you. Why don't you come stay in my home?" Now, I think first off that this is all pretty cool. Here's Paul. "Lord, where do I go?" The Spirit leads him to leave one country and go travel to another country. He immediately gets there, finds someone that is a seeker, leads that person and their entire family to Christ, and as only God can do, gets a free place to stay the entire time they're there. How many of you would say God led him? I think we would undeniably say that God was in this. And then this happens. Verse 16. As we were going to the place of prayer, so they were heading back to that same place outside the city by the river to pray, we met a slave girl who had a spirit of divination and brought her owners much gain by fortune telling. She followed Paul and us, crying out, "These men are servants of the Most High God, who proclaim to you the way of salvation." And this she kept doing for many days. Paul, having become greatly annoyed, turned and said to the spirit, "I command you in the name of Jesus Christ, come out of this girl." And immediately it came out. But when her owners saw that their hope of gain was gone, they seized Paul and Silas and dragged them into the marketplace before the rulers. And when they had brought them to the magistrates, they said, "These men are Jews, and they are disturbing our city. They advocate customs that are not lawful for us as Romans to accept or practice." The crowd then joined in attacking Paul and Silas, and the magistrates tore their garments off of them and gave orders to beat them with rods. Okay, this is taken a total turn for the worse. And when they had inflicted many blows upon Paul and Silas, they threw them into prison, ordering the jailer to keep them there safely. Okay, you are led by the Spirit to leave Turkey and go to Greece. You get to Greece, everything's working out. I mean, it's over and over again. God is confirming, I heard God right. You meet a woman and her family, you lead them to Christ, you get a free place to stay. I mean, I think every one of us would say, Jesus is in this, Jesus is in this, Jesus is in this. But then Paul does what I think most of us would say was a completely honorable, right thing to do. There was a girl who was demon-possessed, and he casts the spirit out of the girl. She is now free. We would say that is another good thing. You would say Paul was led by the Spirit there to do that, but this totally turns around on him. He ends up beaten with rods and thrown into prison. How many of you have ever heard the phrase, "That guy can take a licking"? In fact, if you're my age, you might remember the famous Timex slogan that said, you want to buy a Timex watch because they can take a licking and keep on ticking. You probably heard that slogan before. Did you know that the phrase "take a licking" actually can be attributed to this day and age? Because what the Romans would do is the Romans would divvy out punishment from a Roman lictor. So you're going to see this picture of a Roman lictor. And so Paul said this in 2 Corinthians 11:25. He actually was reminiscing over all the terrible things that had happened to him. And he talks about 3 times, 3 different moments, not once, not twice, 3 times, 3 different scenarios, situations, I was beaten with rods. So this is one of those instances where Paul is beaten with a rod. And a lictor is the person that would carry out this punishment. So they would be a normal citizen that would be asked to carry this out. It was kind of like an honorary position that it was an unpaid position, but a citizen could aspire to be a Roman lictor. And what a lictor would do would be to put on a toga and they would carry around a fasces. And a fasces was a bundle of rods wound up together, as you can see from this picture. And oftentimes they would have an axe head at the top or an axe head on the side. And then, so when it says they were beaten with rods, they would take this fasces, and these men dressed in togas would have them bend over and kind of like kneel on all fours, and they would beat their back with this fasces. So this is the beaten with rods. So it wasn't like they took a switch and spanked him a few times. This is a bundle of rods. This would hurt badly. It's a lot different than maybe the picture you've gotten from movies that show fraternity hazing. I think many of you will remember the movie Animal House. I'm not recommending this movie, but there's a famous scene where they're hazing somebody. They dress in togas, and the person wearing a toga is kind of basically mimicking a Roman lictor, and he grabs a rod and he starts spanking the guys. That was their initiation, and every single time the guys would chant in unison, "Thank you, sir. May I have another?" It's totally different than what you've seen in the movies. These beatings were all about publicly shaming the people. Paul was later on, when he wrote his letter to the church in Thessalonica, he was thinking back to what he experienced in Philippi. Remember, everything had happened because Paul believed he was led by the Spirit to this place. And he talks about how he had suffered and been shamed in Philippi. Now, in normal circumstances, a Roman magistrate would feel like this public beating, this public shaming was enough of a punishment for what Paul had done. But instead, they decided to also throw him in prison. So he gets beaten, shamed, and thrown into prison, all because he cast a demon out of a slave girl. I actually have a question whenever I read this story, and it's maybe a question that you'd never thought of before, but I want to know what happened to the girl. You know, we never hear anything else about this slave girl again. So what we know about the slave girl is this. We know from this text that she had a spirit of divination, that it was believed by people that she could tell the future. They would go to her, pay her owners money, and so she would give them insight into what they should do next. Kind of like what we want today. We want a hint about our future. And what you might not have known, but Luke assumes that his readers already know this. That this woman, this young girl in Philippi that could tell the future, that she was possessed by a Pythian spirit. That she was connected to the Oracle of Delphi. That she was like one of the attendants of the Oracle of Delphi, that same gift that the Oracle of Delphi had, that the spirit of Apollo had also gifted this girl to. And she was able to make her owners a lot of money. Luke also assumes that you would know the culture of Greece. You see, we read later on when Paul was in Athens, that he was amazed walking through Athens, that in Athens they worshiped everything. That everywhere he went, there was an altar to some god. The people of Greece worshiped everything. In fact, Paul even commented about one time in Athens, he saw an altar that had an inscription to an unknown god. Like, they worshiped everything, and they even had a just in case we missed something altar. So the people in that culture, they didn't have any issue with this girl. They didn't, in fact, they either didn't have an issue with her or they were completely neutral with her. Like if you were neutral, you might say something like, well, If people are looking for hope for their future and she gives them some hope, then what does it really matter? It's all good. Even if they didn't believe, if it meant something to other people, wasn't that a good thing? So the people literally had no issue with her at all. They thought, hey, what's good for them is good for them. It's totally innocent. I was thinking, isn't that a lot of what our culture is like today? Do you realize that in just a short period of time, our entire city and homes are going to be decorated like haunted houses everywhere? That you'll hear things about fortune tellers and psychics, and where most of us, we don't really believe those things. Many people in our community, their attitude now is that, hey, if that helps someone else, fine. Oh, it's just a gimmick. It doesn't hurt anyone. Let them read their tarot cards. What does it matter? So the culture was very similar today. And church, I would say this, that being neutral on something is equating to you saying, this is innocent. It doesn't have any effect. But if you actually read the original language that Luke is using, Luke, by the language with which he describes this girl, describes it in two ways. He makes a huge difference by the language that he's using from what is biblical, godly prophecy and the future telling, the fortune telling that this girl is saying, that it is radically different. And you cannot mistake from the language that Luke is using that Luke is making it clear that this is absolutely evil, that it is far from innocent. This girl is possessed by a demon. Verse 17 and 18. She followed Paul and us, crying out, "These men are servants of the Most High God, who proclaim to you the way of salvation." So she's following after Paul and Silas, saying, "These men are servants of the Most High God. They're telling you the way to be saved." And she did this for days. For days, Paul and Silas ignored her as she followed him around, saying, "These men are servants of the Most High God, telling you the way to be saved." And there's some people that think, oh, she was mocking them. She actually wasn't mocking them. What she was trying to do is make who they were relative to the culture. In other words, in Greece or Macedonia, they worshipped many gods. They were polytheistic. And she was basically saying, well, relative to our culture, these men are telling you, based upon their belief systems, the way that you can be saved. So she's trying to make their message very culturally applicable, saying, out of all the different ways there is to heaven, or all the different ways to find God, these men are telling you their way to find God. And this went on for days. Now, after a while, the Bible tells us that Paul got greatly annoyed. I think he got annoyed for a couple reasons. I think he got annoyed first off because he knew that there were legitimate seekers in that community that were hearing his message, and that the devil inside of her was beginning to confuse people. Because you see, the way that the enemy works is the enemy he tells some truth, and then with the truth, he shares a lie. So have you ever played that famous game like that? It's kind of a party trick game, the two truths and a lie. And have you ever met anybody that's really good at that game? I mean, they can tell you 3 facts about themselves, and they do it with such confidence, you can't tell. And that's kind of the way that the devil works, is the devil will share with you 2 truths so that you kind of fall into him, but then he will slide in a lie. So he's very deceptive and manipulative. And I think to some degree, Paul was nervous that the unsaved wouldn't know the difference between the lies that the Spirit was saying from this girl and the truth of the gospel. So I think he was annoyed about that. And I also think he, after a while, just got annoyed because she kept saying the same thing over and over and over again. It was probably driving him nuts. People have asked for years, why did it take so long for Paul to cast the demon out of that girl? Why did it take him days? I mean, because once he decided to, it happened instantly. I think this is actually just an important side note, so I really want you to catch this. Paul didn't do it before because he's wise. Because Paul knew that if it didn't happen at the right moment, there were the aftermath of casting a spirit out of this person was going to be huge. And Paul knew that he was led by the Spirit to Greece to minister to all of Greece. And what he didn't want to do is have ministry to one person, make it so that he couldn't minister at all in Greece again. Because Paul knew the result of what would happen if the spirit was casted out of that girl. Paul knew that this girl who was a fortune teller, which meant as far as being a slave, she had very high status. That she wouldn't be abused because oftentimes if you were a young slave girl, how were they making a profit off of you? They were trading you and selling you for sex. But this girl, men would not have had sex with her because they believed the spirit of Apollo was inside of her, that she had a python spirit. So men would not have touched her. So she had high status. She made her owners money. And Paul knew that as soon as that spirit left her, she would immediately lose her status, become a normal slave, and there would be a great chance that this girl would end up a sex slave. Paul also knew that her owners would be livid because of the amount of money they would lose because of this. So Paul knew that he was going to be in trouble, and possibly this girl would be in trouble. So instead of cast the spirit out immediately, he waited. I love that so much because oftentimes we think things like, you know what? You just need to say the truth and say it boldly, even if it offends everybody. And I want to tell you that Paul is about the boldest, most faith-filled person that we read about in Scripture, and we see him using wisdom with the timing and what he does. And I think we can learn a lot from that. But eventually, Paul gets greatly annoyed. So he's annoyed because he's worried about her influence, but then he's annoyed because she's just annoying him. Any of you have children? When your children are little, did your kids ever get a phrase that they started saying over and over again? Maybe the first time they said it, you laughed and thought it was funny. And then your kids, because you laughed, they would say it again several times for several days, and you would continue to think it was funny. But after a while, they would keep doing it, and you stopped laughing. It just started thinking, oh, they're still saying that phrase. And then after a while, they keep doing it because they want you to think it's funny, and now it's just annoying. My kids, when they were little, I don't know where they heard this. I don't know where they got it from. But my kids one time made the statement, Daddy, if you were big and juicy, we would eat you. So the first time we heard this, Di and I thought, that's funny. So they said it again, and now it started turning into songs. And they would say, Daddy, if you were big and juicy, we would eat you. And we would laugh and think it's funny. But after about a week, we were done with the big and juicy thing. And we stopped laughing and just said, will you guys please stop saying that? And then after about a month, they would keep doing it. And it just made us mad. It was incredibly annoying. And I can just picture this was Paul. Paul had had enough. He was tired of this girl saying the same thing over and over again. And he turned around and he casted the spirit out of her. But my question for you is, what ended up happening to the girl? We know that Paul and Silas ended up in prison. So one of the reasons that it took Paul so long to cast that spirit out actually happened to him. He got in trouble, beaten with rods, thrown into prison. So what happened to the slave girl? We don't ever read about her again in Scripture. You think we don't read about her again because the unthinkable happened? Is it possible Luke didn't share the plight of this girl because he didn't want us to know that she just ended up sounds horrible, but because she ended up a sex slave? Acts was written to be connected to Luke's gospel. It is so important that you not read your Bible like you would a normal book. You don't start in the beginning and read to the end because it's not written in chronological order. Luke and Acts were meant to be read together. They weren't meant to have the book of John slapped in the middle. So Luke assumes things. Have we talked about that? That Luke assumes you know what the spirit of divination, that it's connected to the Oracle of Delphi. Luke assumes that you know this is evil. Luke assumes by his writing that you know that the Greek culture wouldn't have had an issue with this girl. So a lot of these things are callbacks to what Luke had written in his gospel. Well, Luke repeatedly, specifically in Luke chapter 8, verse 2, he talks about that the church had many women that were once demon-possessed that were now followers of Jesus. So Luke assumes you read Luke and Acts together, that you have not just Acts understood, but you have Luke understood. So Luke, most scholars believe, that in all likelihood doesn't say anything about this girl because you would know the culture. You would know what would have been the common practice. And the common practice was that the church would oftentimes buy someone's freedom. That once this girl became no longer valuable to her owners, the greatest way that they could make any money off of her would not have been to sell her as a sex slave, but it would have been to sell her freedom. And if you think about it, if this girl would have ended up actually a sex slave, I mean, it almost would have destroyed all of the book of Acts. It would have just been, and it would never have been kept secret. But you would get the impression that the girl probably became instrumental in the Christian mission moving forward. I would even say it is likely that Lydia, who is this incredibly hospitable, loving person, devout follower, who was a devout follower of God, is now a devout follower of Jesus, in all likelihood, probably helped purchase this girl's freedom, that this girl probably came into her household, and that in all likelihood, her owners would have sold her to the church because that would have been the greatest profit they would have had. So now I want to go back to being led by the Spirit. Here's Paul in Turkey. Jesus, I want to go where you want me to go. I want to do what you want me to do. So the Lord gives him a vision that sends him to Greece so that he could meet a girl, that he could deliver not only physically from a spirit, but spiritually into her salvation. We've talked the entire time about the purpose of the Holy Spirit coming is for one reason, and that is to greater empower you and I to be witnesses.